Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 121 of Album of the Day, in which today I'm going to be reviewing the new album from a band from Chicago that definitely happen to be one of the most critically acclaimed rock bands out there, they're sort of they're a pretty eclectic, pretty, ambitious sort of band, it's band, and I'm talking about the band known as Wilco. They definitely, are definitely one of the most creative, one of the most unique, and one of the most gifted rock bands, working in music today. So it's rock music, but it's not like super flashy and it's not necessarily like about looks or getting their songs played on the radio. So they're definitely a band that's that doesn't have the kind of flashy sort of rock star sort of cred. It's rock music with a much more artsy, much more refined sort of spin, pretty much. So I'm here to talk about their newest album, which just came out last week. So I'm getting to a pretty new release here. The album is called Schmilco. I wanted to review this today because, if you watch my channel, you know that I'm a huge fan of Wilco. They've had a pretty, diverse and pretty versatile discography, and they got so many albums in their discography that definitely are some of my favorite albums of all time, such as, of course, Being There, Summer Teeth, which I reviewed a couple years ago for a throwback review, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, which is probably my favorite album in their discography, and A Ghost Is Born. It seemed with those four records, the band was getting better and better and can do no wrong. They did tend to lose steam a little bit in the mid to late 2000s with Sky Blue Sky and their self-titled record, which I thought were kind of underwhelming because they didn't really push the boundaries as much as the records before had. The band started to experiment a little more with The Whole Love in 2011, which that was a pretty decent record, I will admit, although not their best in my opinion. But in my opinion, the band sort of, The Whole Love was pretty good, but I felt that it was kind of missing some of that charm that I loved about Wilco. But I think that really came back with a vengeance with the band's last full-length album, Star Wars, which came out in 2015. Great record. And so this album is coming about a year after Star Wars and recorded around during the same time as that album was. But, but this record isn't necessarily, what I like about it is that it's not just a rehashing of Star Wars. Star Wars was a very kind of raucous, very fuzzy, in-your-face kind of, rock album. This, on the other hand, is a much more quieter, more stripped back, and maybe a darker and more introspective album than, Star Wars. But still, the band hasn't lost their instrumental density, or their ambition, or their tunefulness. They still got... What's going on in here is, what the band still can do really well. This is what the album artwork looks like. Some pretty cool artwork on this. Design, in case you don't know who the artist on the artwork for this album is, that is Joan Cornella. There's the inner sleeve there, and there's a little paper in here that's a poster of the album cover, and then it has the lyrics on the back there, and of course produced by Jeff Tweedy along with Tom Schick, who worked with the band on their last few albums. And additional drums on here provided by, you know, Jeff Tweedy's son, Spencer Tweedy. And he actually did a little collaboration, a little side project with him back in 2014 called Tweedy. They released a full-length album, Suki Ray, in that year, which I thought it was cool to, you know, sort of see him professionally playing music with his son, who's just learning how to play drums and is actually a pretty damn good drummer for his age. I thought it was cool to see them do that, but I just felt like that, you know, that project didn't need to happen. I mean, what I really wanted was another Wilco record. So thankfully, we got that in 2015, and you know, kind of, you know, whipped out what is probably their best album since 2004. And, you know, I think they knocked out a pretty solid album here as well, which I'll go into more detail about here in this video. So that's the packaging for the new Wilco album, called Schmilco. Now, Schmilco is definitely, you know, kind of a change of pace from Star Wars a little bit, as I mentioned. You know, it focuses more on, like, songwriting and stuff like that, while Star Wars wasn't necessarily about lyrics. You know, the lyrics on that album weren't amazing, I will admit. You know, they didn't really move me to tears or anything like that, even if there are a few moments that tend to do that on the last record, like Taste the Ceiling or Magnetized. But I found myself more falling into the grooves of that album on songs like More or Random Name Generator, or the opening track on that record, or Pickled Ginger, something like that. You know, but, you know, so I thought it was pretty refreshing to see Jeff Tweedy sort of focus on songwriting this time around. I mean, this is probably some of Wilco's best lyrics, in my opinion, in a little while. I mean, the last few records, the lyrics weren't necessarily amazing or anything like that, because, you know, of course, they're obviously a band that focuses more on jams most of the time. I can see that, you know, coming through in, like, their music. So yeah, it's an acoustic record mostly, but, you know, it's not a slow record, thank God. And also, you know, the band isn't playing it safe here. There's still a lot of diversity and a lot of nuance to the instrumentation on here as well. And, instrumentation as well. It's kind of like what King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard did with, you know, the album Paper Mache Dream Balloon, where they went for a totally acoustic sound, but yet they were still focusing so much on, like, the layering and, you know, the details and stuff like that, and not just cranking out a boring acoustic record or anything like that. You know, Wilco kind of did the same thing here with Schmilco. They did try to make an attempt to do something like this on their 2007 record, Sky Blue Sky, but, you know, like most people, you know, I didn't really care for that record. You know, I don't think the slower, more, you know, I don't think the slower, more, you know, stripped back direction really worked that well for me on that record. You know, it was kind of underwhelming, although they did try to be a little conceptual. It just kind of, you know, they tried a little too hard with that one. And same thing with the self-titled record. It was certainly more upbeat than Sky Blue Sky, but still, there wasn't enough ambition there in terms of the production. They were just kind of playing it safe there. But, you know, not on Schmilco. Not on this new album. Of course, this album isn't going to appeal to everyone. I know there are actually a few critics that said this record was one of Wilco's worst albums or something like that, even though majority of the reviews I saw were actually pretty positive for this album. I mean, there's a glowing A- review of this album on Consequence of Sound or something like that. So, which makes sense. When Wilco releases an album, it usually gets some pretty positive reviews. And I know that there are some fans out there that are probably going to think this record is boring or criminally short or something like that. But me personally, I actually really like this record. I mean, underneath these kind of stripped back spaces, these are actually very compelling songs still. The opening track on this record is Normal American Kids, and, you know, this is, like, sort of a, you know, a bit of an intimidating intro for the album, because it's not, like, you know, it's not, like, the super energetic, ballsy sort of, you know, intro track like what EKG was for Star Wars. I mean, you know, it's definitely a much different intro. It's just an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, and a vocal from Jeff Tweedy. But what really makes the song actually pretty interesting, in my opinion, are the lyrics. I'm gonna have to get out the booklet to read you some of the words here. You know, it's sort of a song about, you know, sort of, Jeff Tweedy sort of reminds himself of, like, long ago. Yeah, and talking about how, you know, he was kind of a frustrated, kind of, you know, sort of, you know, doubtful sort of human being during his, like, his adolescent years, possibly, you know, like, you know, he's holding a grudge, and talking about holding a grudge before he knew people could die, and also, like, you know, he was like, you know, since he was high most of the time, you know, he, you know, always had sort of this, you know, bitter feeling about normal American kids that was kind of strange to him, you know, and talking about how, you know, there wasn't very many stuff that he liked then. So, some pretty, you know, he's definitely going into some pretty dark stuff over here. I mean, he's not beating around the bush here. He's definitely diving right in to, you know, what his issues were, you know, back during his, you know, younger years or something like that, you know. So it definitely, you know, shows how Jeff Tweedy could definitely write a pretty somber, melancholy kind of folk song, and, you know, and definitely do it really well. I can tell that he definitely takes a lot of inspiration from songwriters like Bob Dylan and stuff like that. You know, if you look at moments like the song Summer Teeth off of like the song Via Chicago off of Summer Teeth, which, you know, was inspired by a Henry Miller murder ballad, and he ended up writing this really gorgeous sort of, you know, murder ballad that, you know, is definitely pretty emotional, you know, moment off of, you know, that album. He's sort of gone back to that sort of same kind of songwriting chops here on this new album, I feel like pretty much. You know, the following track on here, If I Ever Was a Child, is a more kind of, you know, upbeat sort of, you know, moment on the record, but still has, you know, some pretty interesting lyrics, and I think it has some pretty nice sort of almost, you know, chamber pop kind of instrumentation that actually kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, Belle and Sebastian or something like that. And like, you know, the lyrics on here are pretty interesting as well. You know, even though it isn't necessarily the best song on the record. You know, a lot of the songs on here are like 2.5 minutes long, but still, like, you know, the band does still make it work with some of the longer songs on the album too, like the track Cry All Day. I like kind of the weepy slide guitar on the track, and the way the acoustic guitar, the bass, and the drums syncopate with one another. Yeah, this album definitely focuses quite a bit on rhythm, pretty much, and, you know, in a pretty good way, you know. You know, because there are some records where bands tried to go in a much more rhythmic direction, and it didn't really work out too well, like with Radiohead, with what they did with The King of Limbs. You know, the more rhythmic approach didn't really work for me. However, here on Schmilco, this new Wilco record, they focus on rhythm, but they do it in a much more sort of, you know, interesting, in a much more sort of, you know, compelling kind of way. Like, you know, and there's some pretty, you know, melancholy lyrics on here, like, but the term cry all day, it sounds maybe a little absorbing or indulgent a little bit, but really it's not if you really dive into the lyrics, Themes of frustration and, stuff like that definitely do pop up quite a bit on this record. This song, talking about how he never really took it so seriously, but, he was like, it actually was kind of serious. And, he has some pretty kind of, yeah, and he definitely, and one of my favorite lines on this track is, that really just represents sort of his apathy, pretty much, is, I'm sick of your reflection, you're just a smart ass and blind. Pretty much. And also, I think the kind of driving instrumentation on the track is, pretty cool and stuff like that. So it's definitely one of my favorite songs on the album. The song Common Sense is a much more freakier track on here. I love the kind of stuttering guitar tones on that track, as well as the shivering xylophones that appear at the end of the song. Song as well is probably I think it's probably the only track on this record that I think would fit snugly into the track listing of A Ghost Is Born, in my opinion. And also there are some pretty, dark lyrics on this track. This album is pretty much like a dark journey of the soul, I would say, lyrically, pretty much. The following track on here, Nope, has some pretty, has some pretty kind of, absurd religious undertones going on to the lyrics that I do like about it. Like on one of my favorite lines on here, the slant may rain, those my door, tambourines my floor and four, laughs and shakes my folded face, where Jesus mowed my lawn. Fame has legs, blazing chrome, amputate, but it's never quite gone. Rakes and clover shone like snakes, shine overrate my crime. Why kill a man when you can drive him crazy? Why make it end when my amusement always depends on the joke? Won't you lend me my punchline? Yeah, there's some pretty witty references on this track that I do really like on here. The song Someone to Lose sort of, is a track that, deals with, there's some pretty, it's sort of a song that's maybe a little more personal on here. It's, so I would say this record is kind of, it's kind of, it does deal with self-doubt, but it's also definitely very self-aware as well, which I do like about it. Track, and I do like this track, I do really like the bass line on that track. I think, they focus so much on rhythm. I mean, John Stariat, is cranking out some of his best bass work, I think, on this record. The bass line, he cranks out some pretty memorable bass lines, like on this track, and I think it syncopates really nicely with Jeff Tweedy's acoustic guitar and Glenn Coche's drumming as well. Oh, I forgot to show you the disc. Let me show you that real quick. And it's definitely, and this album is a little softer, but still at the same time, it's definitely still pretty kind of, loud and clear, pretty much. I mean, on the song Someone to Lose, there are these sudden blaring guitars. Nels Cline comes in with these sudden blaring guitars that I think sound pretty nice on there. There's the song Happiness, which has some of my other favorite lines on this track. Some pretty dark lyrics, which I think deal with maybe the death of her mother or something like that. Sort of, the tension that he's feeling because of that. In which he did make an attempt to write a song about that on one of the songs off of Sky Blue Sky, On and On and On, but he really fell through the cracks of that track, so I can So I'm not surprised many fans say that's like one of the worst Wilco songs, in which I wouldn't say it's like, like over the top terrible, but yeah, I would still call it one of the worst Wilco songs. But not that I hate it with a passion, just yeah. Let's not talk about that track, okay? Happiness, however, it talks about it in a much more poetic and in a much more relatable way on lines like, I gather things can change, so maybe she's asleep in her grave. She gave her body to science, so I'm not sure what's in her place. Maybe roses or Tanqueray. Ray. And he mentions on lines how it kind of, makes him feel a little melancholy, like, my mother says I'm great, and it always makes me sad. I don't think she's being nice. I really think she believes that. So now I bend my days around the people. Other people obey. So sad it's nothing. Happiness depends on who you blame. And I do like the kind of, romping marching band instrumentation on here, the kind of, out of tune piano on the song, and, and stuff like that. And the drums on this song do sound pretty nice, and pretty in the moment, stuff like that, even though not as insane as they were on Star Wars. The song Quarters has a scene on it that's like set in a bar, talking about a tavern where a friend of Jeff's worked, which was cold and dark as a cavern. And how this person always made him sleep around every fly and floozy under booths and bums asleep and stuff like that. So it's a pretty interesting sort of lyrical song on here, although I wouldn't say the instruments that go along with it are amazing, although it does end with a really nice slide guitar interlude at the end. The song Locator is a song that, after all these tracks, they're a little more stripped down, a little more introspective, and more sort of, quiet. This is the one track that and I think the only song on here that I think would fit snugly into the track listing of Star Wars, because it's got these really dissonant keyboards, as well as this kind of hypnotic bass line, and these sort of off-kilter guitar tones, and the drums are super groovy on this track. Glenn Coche cranks out some awesome drums on the track, and it's definitely pretty refreshing to see a moment like this coming in on an album like this. Definitely one of my favorite songs on the record, although I wouldn't say it's amazing songwriting-wise, but in terms of, energy, it's definitely a great teaser track for the album. The song Shrug and Destroy has this really nice sort of baroque, gorgeous, almost baroque pop instrumentation with its, really nice kind of, patient piano chords, as well as a pretty sweet dulcimer solo in the middle as well, which shows the band adding in some unusual instruments in there. Now, the last two songs in the record, they're not bad. I wouldn't take them out of the track listing, but they do seem to kind of pale in comparison a little bit, like the song We Aren't the World, Safety Girl, where I'm not really digging some of the lines on here, complain every day, there's a spider in my suit. There's some sort of lines in here that, try to be a little more absurd than anything, but still they feel kind of silly and kind of lazy, in my opinion, a little too goofy for my taste, as well as the instrumental as well. I don't think it really worked out too well for trying to make a more upbeat song here. And the closer on here, Just Say Goodbye, while I do like the instruments on the song, they sound pretty good. The lyrics on there didn't really have strong of a point, and also it kind of ends abruptly. It's kind of a little bit of a snoozy closer for the album. But really, other than that, this is a pretty good album, Wilco, I think, cranked out, some of their best lyrics to date, and the production sounds really nice. it's basically all the things that you would want in a good Wilco album, just, not as, in your face and not as, like, noisy as you would expect, but still very, detailed and tuneful. So I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this, out of 10 on this record. So, just let me know what you guys think of this album in the comment section. If you like this record, just let me know. And not much more I can say there. So yeah, that's my review of the new Wilco album, titled Schmilco. I'll see you for episode 122.